Buenos dias and good day to you. I went fishing this morning. I went down the beach. Sometimes you catch stuff, sometimes you don't. I caught 3 big fish today, and I didn't know what they were. I want to eat at least one of them tonight and a couple more in the next couple days. So I came home and I thought I'd find an app on my phone that I could download and identify the fish in English. And I did a quick search on my phone. I found 3 apps. Each one that I went to, I logged in, downloaded, opened them, and after my understanding that they were free, that's what they were advertised as when I downloaded them. Soon I found out they're free if you sign up for a subscription service and you provide your credit card number. So I quickly bailed out of those apps and said, I'll just eat the fish, forget about what they're called. It's another example, as I've been continuing on in this class with other examples, of how capitalism allows for that kind of morality to trick people into thinking that they're getting something for free when really they're being leveraged into paying for a service that they maybe won't even need. Now, I want to talk about another circumstance and then tell you why I'm mentioning these 2 examples to start class. One of my favorite pastimes when I bring my students down here to Mexico is to take them for a walk, and soon they will come across a police car with flashing lights going by them, especially at night. And I take a look at them, and if they don't show me what they're thinking on their face, I ask them what they think, and they usually express, oh, there must be some crime going on, something's going on, somebody's being busted, somebody's in trouble. But in actual fact, that's not happening at all. In actual fact, the police down here use their lights to let the public know where they are. I mean, have you ever been in a circumstance in a big city where you feel like you need a police officer and you don't know where they are? You don't know where they are until after the fact, right? When they put their lights on and they're chasing the bad people, so to speak. That's when we put our sirens and lights on in the US. But here in Mexico, they use the lights to let people know where the police cars are in case you need them. Not that you do need them down here. I haven't seen any incidents since I've been here, 13 years. And yeah, it's a complete big paradigm shift, if you want to think of it that way, in terms of what we perceive when we look at lights. And I actually invented a term to describe this that I use in the context of media. I call it cultural myopia. Cultural myopia. Myopia is when you have a short-sighted view towards an intended object because you don't have experience with that object. So you can only see close up, and in the distance, everything is fuzzy. Cultural myopia is enforced by and enhanced by our media. It helps us in some ways to perceive of things that are not necessarily there, as in the case of the police cars, thinking that there is a problem when there's not, when we see lights on in Mexico. And so today, as we take on Russia, I wanted to introduce these 2 stories to you about fishing and also about the police lights, because our country certainly has some cultural myopia when it comes to Russia. That is, we don't think very highly of it, right? In fact, there are a few countries in the world where the U.S. kind of has to put them down so we feel better about our system. China's one of them, Russia's another, Cuba would be another one. All those communist countries, right, we want to portray as the devil incarnated, if you believe in religious metaphors. And so that's cultural myopia, right? Because it prevents us from really learning about a country. So we're going to take on Russia today. We're going to take on some dimensions of Russia that have to do with trying to break down some stereotypes we have about Russia, because we're going to get, it's a tendency to dismiss the country as corrupt, authoritarian, backwards, those kinds of things, communistic. And certainly there is truth to all of those statements, but the situation ends up where we don't have a really deep understanding of Russia. In fact, if I was to ask you, name one single Russian piece of media content that you have ever seen, could you do it? I know I would be challenged. I think about Ivan the Terrible, or some really, really old films from the 1920s. I think of Masha and the Bear, which is talked about by this chapter, but I really know very little about Russia, so I'm sure I have plenty of cultural myopia myself. So we're going to take on this country, which was founded as a communist, well, it wasn't founded as a communist country, but it spent most of its recent history as a communist country when it was a Soviet Union. And it was much bigger than it is now. It's got 11 time zones now as Russia, but back when it was a Soviet Union, including Belarus and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and all these other satellite Soviet countries. It was a huge country, and it was in a Cold War with the United States. It was in Cold War because after World War II, capitalism really emerged as our main economic and political system, and communism emerged as the main economic and political system in Russia. And we don't think that there's anything good about communism, even though when I was in communist China, I didn't see any porn shops, I saw no gas stations, no pharmacies, I saw natural cures, shops with natural cures. There are dimensions of China that, because it's communistic, are at least interesting to take a look at, and the same can be said for Russia. And communism does try to defeat that very idea that I was subjected to when I tried to download a fish app of somebody making money off me, just because I was gullible enough, I should say, to take the word free at its face value. So there were some dimensions of communism that tried to create equality among people, that tried to create public services for people, and chief among the interests of communism when it comes to media content is the idea that the public's tastes should be elevated by media content. That media content shouldn't just be entertaining, although we're going to be talking a lot today about how entertaining Russian media content is. The media content should also be raising our vocabulary, should be raising our sophistication, should be raising our appreciation of the arts, should be challenging us, in essence, should not be dumbing us down. And so in traditional traditional Russian media, you would find lots of opera, symphonies, ballet. You would find the high arts in many examples as being funded by the government to make sure that the public's tastes are elevated. All right, so that's some of my own commentary. It's a long intro for today, but let me continue on now with an intro that starts to match up with our chapter readings for today. And you probably got a little glimpse that Russia went through a transformative change after World War II, somewhere around the 1990s, when it broke up, the Soviet Union, I should say, broke up into Russia and moved away from an autocratic, authoritarian government based on communism towards an autocratic, authoritarian government that is based on a free market capitalistic model. And so it was plunged, if you will, into a completely different economic system. And part of what happened was a big nosedive on the part of its media industries, because Russia, for the first time, started accepting foreign content from other countries, and there just was not the appetite in Russia to consume Russian media in the early 1980s, 1990s, after the Soviet Union broke apart. So you had an immediate decrease in film funding after the Soviet Union broke up. The film industry virtually collapsed. At the same time, you have a lot of pirated films and also songs, music, that are making their way in Russia. And sometimes the pirating is done by the Russian record labels themselves because they can make money off of the pirated music. So approximately 60 to 70% of all music that was listened to by Russians was foreign in the 1980s and 1990s. And leading the charge was MTV Russia. MTV was one of the first foreign companies to be allowed into Russia after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and the entertainment industry really hovered around what MTV was deciding to show. Russia also was copying American formulas for shows like you see around the world. I talked about how Top 40 radio is copied here in Mexico. Well, in Russia you have this show called Pol Shude, Shude, which basically pirated the Wheel of Fortune format. There's a show that's been on American television for at least 40 years. In the 2000s, though, Russian media started to come back. Russian media started to come back and started to generate its own following, and it started to ramp up its own production. So let's move to the present day now. And in the present day, like the other countries we've discussed, there are 5 major corporations that are controlling the scene. And it's interesting to take a look at all of these 5 together, because it says a lot about how intertwined government still is with media. So you don't have independent media like NBC, ABC, CBS. They're independent. I say that. They're not necessarily, because they're dependent on profit making. So they're going to be restrained in other areas rather than government. But in Russia, you have the government that's right in there with the media. And let's take the first company. It's called Gazprom, Gazprom. It's actually from a natural gas company. and one of the subsidiaries is a media company. And this company itself owns 7 broadcast channels. 7 broadcast channels. 5 of them are dedicated towards entertainment. 5 of them are dedicated towards entertainment. The board of directors of Gazprom are very close to Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, probably the president for life. A good example of authoritarianism and autocratic government is he ran for office, served out his 2 terms as president, became vice president. While he was vice president, they rewrote the law that a president could be president without term limits, so he's been president in perpetuity since then. And he urged that this company, Gazprom, purchase another company called Media Most, because Media Most is one of the first companies that started to criticize Russian politics. You couldn't do that in the Soviet Union. In fact, you go to the Soviet Union, if you complain about anything, you're followed around all day, and maybe you get disappeared and go out to the Stalag, out to the deep ice, into the tundra of Russia. So we still have those kinds of implied threats that are going on in Russia through prison terms, etc. And lots of people who Vladimir Putin falls out of place with find themselves poisoned or in prison. At least that's what American media are saying. But I have to caution, could be cultural myopia. We could be judging Russia strictly on American media, and that's why it's blurry from a distance and seemingly clear up front. That's what myopia is, right? It's a optometry term. I should have mentioned that earlier. If you have myopia, you're short-sighted. All right, next up is a channel called Pervy Canal. Basically translated, it means Channel 1. And this is 39% owned by a Russian government agency. 39% of that channel is owned by the Russian government. So, of course, the Russian government is going to have influence, especially on news programs, serious programs that have to do with informing the public and perhaps critiquing government leaders. Next up is a third company. We have Veselogskaya. I'm sure that my pronunciation is way off there. And then there's a whole second word that's super long as well. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. It's owned outright by the government. The government owns it outright, and it happens to be the most watched channel. So it must be doing something right, because people from their own free will are watching that station. It's a similar situation that we have in Britain, right, where the public media, we can look at this as public media on the Russian side, but in Britain we talked about how the BBC is garnering the most viewing. That's not happening in the US. PBS is not garnering the most viewing. And there's a national media group, and this particular company is used to have lots more foreign ownership by MTV and Netflix, and some other American companies were partnering with it. But then Russia passed this law, no more than 20% ownership by a foreign company, so it's had to scale down its operations. There's a fifth company as well. You can read about that on your own. All right, I do want to mention, though, before we leave the present day, that in terms of film, the Russian Ministry of Culture, just like in France, this happens as well. They actually have a Ministry of Culture. Do we have a Ministry of Culture in the United States? No, it's not important to capitalism. We don't have a cabinet post that's about preserving American culture, but Russia does, and Russia uses that post to promote films and to fund films, and they even fund the theaters. If the theaters are showing more than 50% Russian films, they're going to get a subsidy from the government to lower their costs and lower ticket prices. All right, let's talk now about some of the cross-border activities of Russian media going out of the country, exported, media coming into the country, imported. And still, even though Russia has beefed up its own internal media content production, we still have a lot of imported media content coming in to Russia. It's still very, very high. Foreign films continue to generate more in ticket sales than Russian films. There just is an overall struggle to get people interested in Russian programming, not only people at home, but also people abroad, people who would naturally be interested in Russian media, like people living in Kazakhstan or Belarus or even in Ukraine. We have a lot of Russian heritage. You don't have that much interest. And if we look at some of the former colonial empires, Russia was not a colonial empire. It certainly had imperialism. It did invade other countries around it, like Poland, but it wasn't sailing ships all over the ocean like Portugal and Spain and England and France. In those former countries, you find those former colonies are big consumers of the mother country media content. So British content is consumed in the United States, British content is consumed in Jamaica, French content is consumed in Quebec, Canada, Portuguese content is consumed in Brazil, Spanish content is consumed all over Latin America. That's what happens, right? You share the same language, and the country your mother country is more well established, so you're taking it out. Russia has not had that kind of success, except with Masha and the Bear. Masha and the Bear. I'll put a link in the email to that today, so you can take a look at Masha and the Bear. Russia, like the rest of the world, has undergone a digital revolution. And in the context of this chapter, what is talked about is that Russian legacy media, TV, radio, film, newspapers, they have had to compete with new digital media platforms by developing their own platforms. So all of the old legacy media, just like you have here in the United States, put up certain videos that are available for the public to access, put up certain links, certain content on websites, and that's not really anything that's any different from any other country around the world. The chapter ends with a discussion of TV versus YouTube. So everything used to revolve around MTV in the early 1990s and the 2000s. Everything was at TV. MTV, amazing. An American company owned by Viacom was dominating the Russian entertainment market. But now YouTube has surpassed MTV as the most watched visual media platform. And the chapter talks a lot about battle rap. Battle rap, which many of you may know on your own. Battle rap is participated in by bloggers, and these are people who rap against each other. They do it on YouTube, and then you decide who wins. And this led to the first U.S.-Russian battle rap on YouTube. Battle rap was essentially started by a 23-year-old Russian named Alexander Timartsev, and he has a more popular name as the Restorator. That's what he's known as on YouTube, the Restorator. And he argues that TV is artificial. He makes a very interesting point because he says people are watching it sitting around in their chairs. And when they're sitting around in their chairs, they're often getting closer and closer to the horizontal position as the night goes on. Your legs start stretching out, and pretty soon you're laying down with the pillow under you. You've eaten a bunch of terrible food for you that you can hold in your hand that's within reach on your coffee table, like chips and soda or pizza. And then the next thing is you're tired and you fall asleep. So TV is not seen as a very vibrant medium. And Alexander says, no, the people who watch YouTube, we stand up. We were walking around watching YouTube on our phones. We're standing, we're ready for action. I think there's a lot to be said about that just outside of our chapter readings for today. But nevertheless, that is going to wrap up our discussion on Russia. Have a great day.